All right, let's talk about something huge: unions and the future of work. We're going to dive into a big idea that's really shaking up how we think about jobs and labor. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let me ask you something. Just think about it for a second. What if everyone in your industry got a raise at the same time? Like, not just you, but every graphic designer, every nurse, every software dev, no matter which company they work for, boom, a pay bump for the entire field. How would that even be possible? Okay, so that's the big idea we're going to unpack. Here's our game plan. First, we'll cover what is a union. Then we'll get into this thing called sectoral bargaining. We'll look at the case for it, the case against it, and then talk about why this whole debate matters so much right now. And we'll wrap up with a big question for you to think about. Sound good? Let's do it. All right, let's start with the absolute basics. What even is a union? Okay, so at its core, a union is just an organization of workers who decide to join together. They team up so they can negotiate with their employer as one unified voice, instead of a bunch of people trying to make their case one-on-one. You've probably seen this in the news, right? Think about when nurses go on strike. They're all coming together to demand things like safer staffing or better pay for everyone at their hospital. That right there is a union in action. And what do they actually bargain for? Well, today, it's things you'd expect: better wages, healthcare benefits, safer working conditions. But the historical impact is wow. I mean, the labor movement is behind some of the most basic things about work that we totally take for granted now. The 5-day work week? Yep. Minimum wage laws? Them too. And, not having kids working in factories? You can thank the labor movement for that. This really gets to the heart of why unions exist. It's all about individual versus collective bargaining. Think about it. One warehouse worker walking into the manager's office to ask for a raise. I mean, the power imbalance there is huge. It's kind of David versus Goliath. But now, picture this. All 500 workers from that warehouse, represented by their union, sitting at the negotiating table together. Now that's a different conversation. This is what we call enterprise bargaining. One union negotiating with one company. It's all about balancing the scales. Okay, so we've got the idea of workers teaming up to bargain with one company. But what if we took that idea and just blew it up, made it way, way bigger? That's where sectoral bargaining comes in. It's a system where instead of going company by company, workers and employers negotiate standards for an entire industry all at once. The perfect example is the Writers Guild of America, the WGA. They don't just go negotiate with Netflix, and then Disney, and then Warner Brothers. Nope. They negotiate with a group that represents all the major studios to create one big contract that covers pretty much all writers in the industry. So what kind of stuff gets covered in a deal like this? Well, the whole shebang, really. We're talking minimum wages and benefits for the whole sector, industry-wide safety standards, even standardized training. For example, in Washington state, they have a system that provides standard training and certification for all home care aides. This means everyone gets the same quality training, which is good for the workers and the people they care for. And how does this actually happen? Well, it's usually done through something called a bargaining council or a workers' board. Basically, you get representatives for the workers, representatives for the employers, and even someone representing the public, all in one room. And their job is to hash out the ground rules, the minimum standards for that entire industry. And this is where you really see the difference. With that company by company or enterprise bargaining, you end up with a patchwork quilt of standards. The folks at Company A might have an awesome deal, while people doing the exact same job at Company B, right down the street, are getting paid way less. Sectoral bargaining tries to fix that. It creates a wage floor, a solid baseline that everyone in the industry has to meet. The whole idea is to get similar pay for similar work no matter where you clock in. So that leads us to the big debate. This model sounds really powerful, right? But should the US actually adopt it? As you can imagine, there are some really strong opinions on both sides of this. Let's start with the case for it. People who support this, like the researcher David Madland, say this is exactly what our modern economy needs. Their argument is that when you set these industry-wide standards, you raise wages for everybody and start to shrink that gap between the rich and the poor. They also point out that it could help close stubborn gender and racial pay gaps. And it seems especially well-suited for things like the gig economy, where it's almost impossible for workers to unionize in the traditional way. As Madeline puts it, the goal is to create a system that would strengthen unions and workplace bargaining and really promote this kind of broad-based approach. The whole idea is to give workers a much stronger hand to play. Okay, but on the flip side, there's a strong argument for being cautious here. Critics, like F. Vincent Vernuccio, bring up some really important points. For one, they argue that if every company has to pay the same base rate, it could actually make it harder for you to get a big raise by job hopping. Another huge concern is for small businesses. Could they really afford to pay the same rates as the huge corporations in their field? And if they can't, does that mean higher prices for all of us? This quote really nails the economic argument against it. It says sectoral contracts can discourage employee movement between firms because you're unlikely to receive a raise by taking a job at a competitor. It raises a really interesting question, right? If wages are standardized, how do companies attract the best talent? And how do you, as a worker, get ahead? It's a classic trade-off. Do we create a higher floor for everyone, even if that means a lower ceiling for some? So let's bring this back to today. Why is this debate about an old labor model suddenly so important right now? Well, for starters, look at gig work. I mean, think about it. If you're a rideshare driver, how do you even begin to form a union in the old-fashioned way? Your coworkers are thousands of other people you'll never meet, and your boss is literally an algorithm. Sectoral bargaining could be a way around that, setting standards for all platform workers no matter which app they're using. And what about AI and tech? You've got this rise of ghost work, people doing the invisible, often low-paid work of training AIs. Or think about the dangerous conditions for workers building these massive data centers. A union at just one tech company would have a really hard time tackling these huge, industry-wide problems. This model could also be a huge deal for workers who've historically been left out of labor protections entirely. We're talking about sectors like agriculture and domestic work, which for decades have been excluded from some of the most basic U.S. labor laws. And it's not just new industries. Even in places like manufacturing and warehouses, the pressure from automation and global competition is just relentless. Having industry-wide standards for safety and training could make a massive difference in creating a safer, more level playing field for everyone. And finally, let's talk about teachers. This whole debate is incredibly relevant for them. They're dealing with AI showing up in the classroom, major questions about student data privacy, and trying to keep professional standards high across all kinds of schools, public, private, and charter. A sector-wide approach could help address all of that. Okay, so let's boil it all down. What are the key takeaways? 1. Unions are all about workers building collective power inside one company. 2. Sectoral bargaining takes that same idea and expands it to cover an entire industry. And 3. There's a huge, really important debate going on about whether this system would actually help or hurt American workers and businesses. And that leaves us with the big question that you'll be tackling. Is sectoral bargaining the solution we need for the modern economy? Or is it a flawed model that ends up limiting opportunity? This semester, it's your job to build that argument.